This is an introduction to the study guide and the lecture, Pathwork Lecture 119 on movement, consciousness, and experience. When I create study guides for weekly use by my contact list or by those who engage in the free online meetings that I host, I try to take the lecture and reduce it down to 4 basic parts. I don't do that because it's simple to do that, and I don't do it so that only 4 parts are looked at. But sometimes the lectures bring up so much material that it is very difficult to wade through it. So as I read a lecture, I try to see if it can be divided into bite-sized chunks so that we can read one section, focus on it, and get it before we move on to another section. And of course, what is important is to integrate all these sections. But to integrate the sections, you need to understand the sections. So in movement, consciousness, and experience, there were 4 elements that were presented that I saw in this reading of it. And sometimes I'll see different elements on different readings, so I'll redo a study guide based upon my own different approach. So the first element was triads. The second was the concept, defining our terms of movement, consciousness, and experience. The third was the pleasure principle. And the fourth was resistance. Now, these themes are repeated in other lectures, but they are often highlighted very well in one particular lecture. So in terms of triads, the guide speaks of triads as if they're basic building blocks. Triads simply work well to express ideas. They hold inherent truths very well. In human history, there have been triads. Go back into literature and mythology and theology, and you'll find triads. Practically speaking, a triad represents a stool. What the guide is saying is that if you're sitting on a stool, one leg can be too small, and you can just lean over on that leg, and there's still stability to it. 2 legs can be a little bit short, and you can still find stability on it. Now, if a leg is weak, it's important not to lean on it, but you can literally still sit on a stool, use it as a seat with a wobbly leg. You just don't put pressure on the wobbly leg. And pathwork is a very practical spiritual discipline. And so the examples or my understanding of it come down to things as simplistic, as practical, as day-to-day, as how to use a stool. So it's important to recognize what aspect of your life doesn't work well, and to perhaps not put too much pressure on that as you look for why. And rely upon the aspects of your life that are sound, that feel solid, even if that's only one of a triad. Now, it's not how you want to live your whole life, but imagine for just half an hour, you can use a stool. If you can just lean back on one leg and balance a little bit and rest. And then perhaps try to find out how to fix the stool. So looking at the triad here of movement, consciousness, and experience. Without movement, life does not exist. That's not a theoretical. If a human being sits so still that they don't move, the body can't exist. The body depends upon movement. For the biology to function, you need to flush the system. The nerves need fresh oxygen. So when you're sitting, for instance, you're mushing some of the blood vessels. You're restricting some of the blood vessels because you're sitting on them. And as you're sitting on them, those nerves and cells that are supplied are not supplied as well. And at some point, you become numb. Even if you put pressure on a part of your arm, for instance, and it goes numb. The reason it goes numb is the nerves are no longer receiving enough blood to transmit back to the brain. Now, you feel that, you sense it. There's a numbness that is a little scary. Sometimes I'll wake up at night and my whole arm is numb, and it's frightening. I keep thinking, What if I didn't wake up? Would it go gangrenous? Would it die? But the reality is that even though the arm is numb, something woke me up. The body has alert systems. So when the arm wakes up, or the tissues start to be reactivated, you shift position, you stand up, you sit down, there can be a tingling. And the tingling is about the nerves waking up and giving feedback, but there are millions of them. And the feedback can sometimes be overwhelming. I use this example because sometimes when an aspect of our life has gone numb, has become deadened, as it reactivates, the signals, the information that comes to you can seem overwhelming, even frightening. But it's part of a natural process. So in terms of movement, movement is learning. Movement is awareness. Movement is anything that shifts where you are on any level of your being, psychic, spiritual, mental, physical, even experiential, which is one of the legs of the triad. So without movement, life does not exist. The second leg is consciousness. Now, increased consciousness requires movement. So there's no disconnecting these, even if we want to look at one at a time. So consciousness, simple consciousness, static consciousness, I get it. And there's an and to that. If there isn't an and to that, the mind atrophies. I'm a senior citizen nowadays, and so I read lots of articles about how to keep your mind alert. And the truth is that the Pathwork lectures keep my mind alert, so I don't really need Sudoku to do that. But it is true that to stay alive, to stay lively, we need to engage our minds. We need to engage in some activity, whether that is grandchildren or grocery shopping or volunteer work or Sudoku puzzles or pathwork. It is important for our consciousness to be constantly refreshed and renewed. And consciousness can't be unlinked from movement. Consciousness moves. That's partly what defines it. Then we go on to experience. And what the guide says here, the one statement that is a one-liner, a pithy little one-liner, is that shallowness is a lack of experience. So if you have a lack of experience in your life, you can't really know it well. You can't talk about it. You can't examine it because you only have a limited amount of experience to go on. In order to increase experience, you'll need to increase your consciousness, and there will have to be some movement. So this is how they're all tied together. Thanks.